22 years is a long time to give a company. I know that now. I didn't fully understand it the morning my manager called me into the glass-walled conference room on the 14th floor and slid a single piece of paper across the table like he was dealing a card. I remember the way the morning light cut through the blinds and striped his face. I remember the coffee I was holding had gone cold. I remember thinking the room smelled like dry erase markers and carpet cleaner. Same as it always had. Same as it had on my very first day back in the fall of 2002. He said my name. Then he said the word restructuring. Then he said the word transition. I nodded. I didn't say anything. I drove home that night and sat in my truck in the driveway for a long time. My wife had left the porch light on. I could see it through the windshield, that small orange glow. And I thought about my daughter starting her junior year in the fall. And I thought about the number on the last statement I'd received from HR. And I thought about what 22 years actually meant in a room like that one. Then I went inside, made a cup of coffee, and went to find my original employment contract. Let me back up. I joined Meridian Industrial Group in the fall of 2002 as a senior project engineer. I was 32 years old. The company designed and manufactured specialized fluid control systems, the kind of equipment that ends up inside petrochemical plants, water treatment facilities, power generation sites. Not glamorous work, not the kind of thing that gets written up in tech magazines, but it was precise, technical work that required people who understood both the engineering and the client side, and I was good at it. Over the next 2 decades, I moved up steadily. Not fast, not political. I wasn't the type who played golf with the right people or made a point of being seen at the right dinners. I worked. I solved problems other people didn't want to touch. I built relationships with clients that outlasted 3 different CEOs at our company. By the time the acquisition talk started, I was carrying the title of Director of Engineering Operations and managing a team of 19 people across 2 facilities. The acquisition was announced internally about 14 months before everything fell apart. A larger industrial group out of Atlanta, I'll call them the parent company, was buying us. The official memo used phrases like strategic alignment and exciting growth opportunity. Most of my colleagues read that memo the way everyone reads those memos. They filed it mentally under things that probably won't affect me directly and went back to work. I read it twice. Then I called my attorney, not because I was paranoid. Because I had learned over 22 years that the people who got hurt in acquisitions were almost always the people who assumed good faith without verifying it. I'd watched it happen to colleagues. I'd watched a man named Gerald, who had been with the company longer than I had, get walked out the door 9 months after an acquisition with a handshake and a severance check that covered 3 months of his salary. Gerald was 61. He never really recovered professionally. My attorney reviewed my contract. She highlighted a few sections and told me to keep the document somewhere safe. Then she said something I wrote down. She said, "The interesting clauses are never in the main body. Look at the schedules." I'd had my original contract renegotiated twice, once when I was promoted to regional manager and once when I moved into the director role. Each time, my then HR director, a woman named Patricia, who had been a straight shooter from the beginning, had insisted on including what she called a long-term stability provision. Patricia had seen too many good people get squeezed out before their incentive packages matured, and she had quietly built language into the contracts of certain senior staff that she believed the company owed something to. The provision, buried in Schedule D of my amended employment agreement, said this: in the event of a material adverse change in role, title, responsibilities, or total compensation, including but not limited to demotion, involuntary reassignment, or any restructuring that resulted in a reduction of more than 15% of base compensation or a removal of previously granted incentive eligibility. Such change would constitute a constructive termination at the company's election, triggering immediate full vesting and payout of all long-term incentive plan awards regardless of their scheduled vesting date. My LTIP balance at the time the acquisition closed was $431,000. It was scheduled to vest in 3 tranches over the next 4 years. I want to be clear about what I was not doing. I was not looking for a fight. I had spent 22 years building something at that company. I believed in the work. I had turned down 2 outside offers in the past 5 years because I genuinely thought the best version of my career was still ahead of me at Meridian. I walked into that period hoping the acquisition would be handled with integrity and that I'd spend another decade doing the work I knew how to do. What I was doing was paying attention. The first sign came 6 weeks after the acquisition closed. The parent company's integration team, a group of 4 consultants who communicated primarily through color-coded PowerPoint slides, circulated an org chart. My name was on it, but my title had changed. Not dramatically, not in a way that most people would have noticed. Director of Engineering Operations had become Senior Engineering Advisor. The reporting line had shifted. Instead of reporting to the COO, I now reported to a regional VP I had never met, a man named Marcus, who was based in Atlanta and had a background in supply chain, not engineering. I emailed my new manager. My old manager had taken a buyout and asked for a meeting to discuss the transition. He responded 4 days later. We scheduled a call for the following Thursday. On that call, Marcus was pleasant and professional. He used the word leverage 7 times. He talked about the parent company's vision for the combined entity. When I asked directly about my role, my team, and my compensation structure going forward, he said everything was still being finalized and that I'd have more clarity in the coming weeks. I said I appreciated the update. I thanked him for his time. I hung up and opened a new document on my computer and started keeping a log. Over the next 3 months, the picture became clear. My team was being restructured under a newly created operations director who was being imported from the parent company's Atlanta office. The 2 facilities I had managed were being consolidated under a different reporting structure. My client relationships accounts I had personally maintained for over a decade were being systematically transferred to a new national accounts group. In month 4, I received a revised compensation letter. My base salary was unchanged, but my bonus target had been reduced from 30% to 12% of base, and my LTIP eligibility had been quietly removed. The letter described this as an alignment with the parent company's standard compensation framework for advisory roles. Advisory roles. I read that letter at my desk on a Tuesday afternoon. I didn't react. I closed the document, locked my computer, and drove to my attorney's office. She read the revised compensation letter. She pulled out my employment agreement. She put them side by side. She looked up at me and said, "They just handed you Schedule D. Here's what I want you to understand about the next part." I did not act impulsively. I did not send an angry email. I did not call Marcus and make demands. I did not tell anyone in the office what I was considering. I went home, made dinner with my wife, listened to my daughter talk about her calculus class, and then sat at the kitchen table after everyone had gone to bed and thought about what I actually wanted. What I wanted was simple. I wanted what I had earned, not what someone had decided to give me retroactively. What I had actually earned under the terms of a contract I had signed in good faith and performed in good faith for 2 decades. I also thought about my father. He had worked 30 years for a paper mill in northern Michigan. When the mill restructured, the week before Christmas in 1998, he lost his pension. Not all of it, but enough. He never complained about it to me directly. He wasn't the kind of man who complained, but I watched it change something in him. A particular kind of quiet settled over him in those years that hadn't been there before. He died in 2017, and I thought about that quiet at his funeral, and I thought about it again sitting at my kitchen table. My daughter was starting college in 2 years. I had done the math. The next morning, I called my attorney and told her to proceed. She sent a formal written notice to the parent company's general counsel, citing the specific provisions of Schedule D, documenting the material adverse changes in role and compensation, and invoking the constructive termination clause. The letter requested full payment of my vested and unvested LTIP balance $431,000 within 30 days, pursuant to the terms of the agreement. Then I went to work. I answered emails. I sat in meetings. I was professional and cooperative, and I did not change a single thing about how I showed up. I heard nothing for 11 days. On the 12th day, my phone rang while I was eating lunch at my desk. It was a woman I had never spoken to before, an attorney from the parent company's legal department. Her voice was very controlled. She asked if I had retained outside counsel. I said I had. She asked if we could schedule a call that week. I said I'd have my attorney reach out to coordinate. I finished my lunch. My attorney told me afterward that the call had gone in an interesting direction. The parent company's legal team had initially taken the position that the restructuring did not constitute a material adverse change under Schedule D, that advisory roles were a standard part of their integration framework, and that the compensation adjustments were company-wide and non-discriminatory. My attorney pointed out 3 things. First, that the plain language of Schedule D made no reference to company-wide frameworks and required only that a material change have occurred, which it had, by any reasonable reading. Second, that the removal of LTIP eligibility alone, which represented a reduction of total compensation well in excess of the 15% threshold specified in the agreement, was independently sufficient to trigger the provision. Third, that Patricia, the HR director, who had drafted the original language, was still employed by the company in a consulting capacity during the transition and had kept meticulous records. The call, I'm told, ended politely but quickly. What I didn't know at the time, what I only learned later, was what was happening on the other side of that call. The parent company was in the middle of finalizing a secondary financing arrangement tied to the acquisition, a significant debt facility. The lenders required a clean representation that there were no material pending employment disputes or contingent liabilities above a certain threshold. $431,000 was above that threshold. My attorney filed a formal demand letter, making the dispute a matter of documented record. She was careful. Everything was accurate, appropriately worded, and fully within the bounds of the agreement. But it was documented. It existed. It had to be disclosed. The timeline that followed moved faster than I had expected. On a Monday, I received a call from Marcus. This was the first time he had called me directly since our initial conversation 4 months earlier. He asked if I had a few minutes. I said I did. He said the company wanted to find a resolution. He said the integration had created some unintended complications. He said the leadership team had the highest regard for my contributions. He used the word valued 3 times in 4 sentences. I said I appreciated him reaching out. He asked if there was any flexibility in my position. I said my attorney was handling all communications related to the matter and that any substantive discussion should go through her. I said it pleasantly. I said it the way you say something when you've already decided, and you're simply being courteous about it. He went quiet for a moment. Then he asked if I would consider staying on in a different capacity, a newly created role they were prepared to offer, with restored compensation and LTIP eligibility going forward. He said the company would like to keep my expertise in the organization. I told him I'd pass the information to my attorney and that she would be in touch. I want to be honest about something. That moment was harder than it might sound. 22 years of investment doesn't just turn off. Part of me heard what he was saying and felt the pull of it, the familiar, the known, the work I had built my identity around for most of my adult life. There was a version of this conversation in which I said, yes, let's figure this out, and probably meant it. But I had watched Gerald. I had watched my father. And I had read the revised compensation letter carefully enough to understand that what had happened was not a mistake. It was a calculation. Someone had calculated that I would accept it, because most people do. Most people absorb the adjustment and tell themselves it's not worth the fight and go back to work and quietly let the years pass. I had spent 22 years being reliable. I had earned the right to make a different calculation. The settlement was reached on a Friday, 6 weeks after my attorney sent the initial notice. The parent company agreed to pay the full LTIP balance, $431,000, structured partly as a separation payment and partly as a consulting retainer for a defined transition period that I would control the terms of. My attorney also negotiated reimbursement of her fees, which the company paid without significant pushback. I signed the agreement at my attorney's office that afternoon. On the way home, I stopped at the nursery and bought a flat of perennials my wife had been wanting for the back garden. It was late in the season and they were on clearance. I put them in the trunk and drove home with the windows down. My wife was in the kitchen when I came in. She looked at my face and she knew. She'd known the shape of it for months. She's sharp, always has been. And she had sat at that kitchen table with me more than once while I worked through the logic of it. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "Did you eat?" I said I hadn't. She made eggs. We sat at the table and I told her the number, and she was quiet for a while, and then she said, "Your dad would have appreciated that." I didn't say anything. I just ate. My daughter found out a few weeks later when we sat down to talk about college finances, and I told her that the situation had resolved and that she didn't need to worry about the second year the way she'd been worrying. She didn't ask too many questions. She's practical, like her mother. She said, "So it worked out?" I said it did. She said, "Good," because I was looking at schools and some of them are not cheap. I laughed for the first time in what felt like a long time. I left the company formally at the end of the transition period. The consulting work was legitimate. They needed continuity on 3 client accounts that would have been significantly disrupted without my involvement. And I provided it on my terms, on my schedule, at a rate I set. By the time the engagement concluded, I had been paid an additional $60,000 in consulting fees. The regional VP from Atlanta, Marcus, left the company 8 months after the acquisition. I heard about it through a former colleague. Apparently, the integration had gone poorly on several fronts, and the financing complications that had arisen during my dispute had not been the only ones. I don't know the full story. I don't particularly need to, Patricia, the HR director who had drafted Schedule D, sent me a note when she heard. It was brief. It said, "I put that language in there for a reason. Glad it held." I kept that note. Here is what I learned, or maybe what I confirmed, over the course of those months. Contracts are not formalities. They are the only record that exists of what was agreed to before the relationship changed. Most people sign them and file them away and never look at them again, and that's precisely what the people writing them count on. The language that protects you is always buried. It is in the schedules, the exhibits, the appendices. It is in the provisions that seem hypothetical at the time of signing and therefore don't feel worth arguing over. Those are the provisions that matter. I also learned something about patience. There's a particular kind of pressure that builds when you know what you know and you haven't acted on it yet. When you're sitting in meetings with people who think the situation has been resolved to their satisfaction and you know it hasn't been, that pressure can make you want to act too quickly, or say something you shouldn't, or let it show in ways that give the other side information they shouldn't have. I understood, during those months, why most people can't sustain it. It requires a kind of stillness that doesn't come naturally. What helped me was something my father used to say when I was young and impatient. He used to say, "The river doesn't argue with the rock, it just keeps moving." Eventually the rock isn't there anymore. I thought about that a lot in those months. I thought about it when Marcus used the word valued 3 times in 4 sentences. I thought about it when I sat in my truck in the parking lot before walking into the office and reminded myself to behave the same way I had always behaved. Because the moment you change your behavior, you've told them something. The river doesn't argue with the rock. I want to say one more thing, because I think it's the part that actually matters. This was not really about the money. I know how that sounds. $430,000 is not nothing, and I want to be honest. It changed things for my family in real and lasting ways. My daughter's college is fully covered. My wife and I have had conversations about the next chapter of our lives that we couldn't have had otherwise. Those things are real, but I was not doing this for the money when I was sitting at my kitchen table at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night going through my employment agreement with a highlighter. I was doing it because someone had made a decision about my worth, and that decision was wrong, and I had the ability to say so in a language they could not ignore. I had spent 22 years in rooms with people who spoke the language of numbers and schedules and contractual terms. I had learned that language. I had used it in the service of the company for 2 decades, and when the moment came, I used it in the service of something else. That, I think, is what 22 years is actually worth. I'm working independently now. I consult for 3 clients in the fluid systems sector, including one account I brought with me from Meridian that specifically requested I continue managing their projects. I set my own hours. I work from my home office most mornings and take a real lunch break for the first time since I was in my 20s. My wife says I seem like a different person. I think I'm probably just the same person with less to prove. A former colleague reached out a few months ago. He's in a situation with his company, a restructuring, some pressure around his compensation package. He asked if we could talk. We sat in a diner near his office for 2 hours, and I walked him through everything I knew, the things to document, the things to ask for, the way to read a contract the way it was actually written rather than the way you hope it was written. Before he left, he asked me what the hardest part was. I thought about it for a minute. I said, the hardest part was the period before anything was resolved, before you know how it's going to end, when you're holding something that you believe in and no one else can see it yet. When you're going to work every morning and acting normal and carrying this knowledge that is simultaneously your greatest asset and the thing that keeps you up at night. He asked how I got through that part. I said I thought about my father, and I thought about my daughter. And I reminded myself, every single day, that patience is not the same thing as passivity. He nodded. He paid for his coffee and shook my hand and walked out into the parking lot. I hope he goes home and reads his contract. I hope he finds his Schedule D.
They say just forget. Move on like it's easy. But forgetting you feels like remembering someone I've never seen. I've been trying to erase you from the places in my mind, but the harder that I fight it, the more you're hard to leave behind. Every memory keeps slipping through the cracks I try to close, like a face I should remember, but somehow never know. Forgetting you feels impossible, like chasing something I can't hold, like trying to remember someone that I've never even known. I keep reaching through the silence for a past I can't undo, 'cause letting go of what we had feels like losing something true. Every moment turns to fragments, every thought just fades to blue, like I'm searching for a feeling that still only leads to you. Forgetting you feels impossible, like chasing something I can't hold, like trying to remember someone that I've never even known. I keep reaching through the silence for a past I can't undo, 'cause letting go of what we had feels like losing something true. But now every empty moment still reminds me what is real. Forgetting you feels impossible, like chasing something I can't hold, like trying to remember someone that I've never even known. I keep reaching through the silence for a past I can't undo, 'cause letting go of what we had feels like losing something true. I'm freezing, I'm bleeding, slowly fading away. But don't worry, I'm fine. The cold has settled in my heartbeat, like winter living in my veins. Every breath feels numb and fragile, every smile just hides the pain. I'm breaking quietly in silence, falling slow without a sound. Yet I keep saying I'm okay, while my world burns to the ground. I'm frozen here, I'm bleeding slowly, dying piece by piece inside. But I still whisper, it's alright, just to keep you from goodbye. I'm shattered, love, but don't you worry, I'll pretend till my last breath. Even while my soul is fading, I'll say everything's okay. Maybe pain just learned to live here, maybe sorrow feels like home. So I wear my wounds like armor and survive them all alone. I'm frozen here, I'm bleeding slowly, dying piece by piece inside. But I still whisper, it's alright, just to keep you from goodbye. I'm shattered, love, but don't you worry, I'll pretend till my last breath. Even while my soul is fading, I'll say everything's okay. If you ever see me smiling, know it's just my last defense, 'cause sometimes love means hiding how much you're suffering. No, I'm frozen here, I'm bleeding slowly, dying piece by piece inside. But I still whisper, it's alright, just to keep you from goodbye. I'm shattered, love, but don't you worry, I'll pretend till my last breath. Even while my soul is fading, I'll say everything's okay. It's okay.